Greetings my friends and welcome to Nerd Brain. Yet again I'm your host and today we paint. Another Artisan Guild pinup, Janet Demonbane. I must admit I'm a fan of these models. Before I start I have a little something I would like to address. I'm not this super genius painter, I don't have all the answers, I fumble around, I mess up a bit, I make mistakes, I fail, but that's okay. I'm learning all the way and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. That's the main point of this channel anyways. You are here with me on this painting journey and I love you guys so much for being around. Stick around to the end of this video, I have something I'd like to ask you of, so stick around. Back to the paint. Janet the Demonbane from Artisan Guild, printed by my main man from dndfigures.dk. First up, the sculpt itself. It's just this badass woman wielding two crossbows standing on top of a gargoyle. What's not to like? As always, I start thinking about the design and the color theme. I've already primed her black and used a grey zenithal. I don't know how to say it, but maybe it's a video for in the future because this zenithal thing is new to me, so we can address that in a later video. Janet, I'm thinking rough woman, demon hunter, her skin a bit more tanned than Solaria, worn out leather, corset and hood, and a bright red scarf to give some really contrast. The red scarf reminds me of a computer game I once played, I can't remember. And for her leg guards, I will try once again non-metal metal technique, thinking some bluish armor. Once I've mastered this non-metal metal technique, I'll make a full video on how to do it. Until then, I'm just splashing on paint. For the skin, I decided on this recipe: Cadian Flesh Tone, Kislev Flesh and Raglan Flesh Shade. Starting out with Cadian Flesh. I'm using my wet palette here and this is just for keeping the paint moist. As always, I start applying the paint in glaze consistency. I know it's a long process, but I really like the result. When blocking in paint like this, you need to be fast. The paint dries faster and if you miss a spot, you really need to fight the urge to go over it immediately. Wait until it's fully dried, otherwise you'll risk pulling off the paint again and making unwanted texture. Patience is key. The first layer has dried and you can see I missed a spot. This is what I was talking about. Be fast and have patience. Just need to apply 2 more coats. Overall 4 thin coats and now I have a solid ground for the next step. Raglan Flesh Shade. When painting with wash, don't go too small with your brush. Size does matter here. Be fast and always remember, gravity will be your enemy. The shade will flow downwards. I didn't make the law, Newton did. If it pools in unwanted area, dry your brush on a clean paper towel and then you can soak up the excess shade. Leave it to dry completely before next step. It really can ruin an entire mini if you paint over wet shade. Don't do that. Now I bring back the Cadian Flesh Tone, again glazing away, take your time here and follow her every muscle and contour, leaving out the deep recesses. It goes without saying, the better the sculpt is, the easier this part is. You can see I kind of pushed the paint towards the top. There is actually a little trick to this, and that's where you start and finish with your brush. I urge you to try it on spare base or something else. The place you pull off the brush is where the paint is most, if this makes sense to you. Try it out and see for yourself. Next up I mix in Kislev Flesh. 60-50 mix of Cadian Flesh and Kislev Flesh. I'm using an older brush for the mixing part and I then glaze one more time, always ending my strokes where I want the color to be the brightest. Now I paint my nails. Nah, I never do that. I've seen a lot do it though, but I've never got on that wagon. I've soaked this piece of paper towel to sponge up the paint and now it's time for one stroke at a time. It's a long process, but totally worth it. You can barely see the changes at this point. Now a little extra step that was totally unnecessary for this video. Markers purple contrast. Thinned down to a watercolor consistency. The plan was to give a little color to the shadowy parts. Unfortunately, the results are so subtle that you can barely see it properly on camera. That's it for the skin. Sometimes you need to stop, take a break and come back later. This is one of those moments. It's time for the worn out leather. On her boots, corset, straps and the hood. I'm going with dried bark here. It's very vital that you keep this brown color away from her skin. You can fix it, but man, it's a lot more work than you want. Tongue straight in your mouth when you get close to the skin. Never to cross over. Time to darken that leather with Nuln Oil. I use my wet palette to make sure I don't overload the brush with the shade. It's better to do 2 thin coats of shade than 1 thick uncontrollable blob of Nuln Oil. You can always add, it's harder to take off. This scarf proved to be a challenge, and why can't I remember that video game? The scarf is folding in on itself on many levels, and I need to determine which side gets the most light. Now it's time for that base. Again, I'm not that big on bases, but here I feel I have to. There isn't that much going on here. A quiver, I think, with broken arrows, perhaps, and a lantern. The base is primed black with a grey zenithal. Yeah. I just splash on some Nuln Oil all over the cobblestone. After this, I decided to try something with the lantern, trying to achieve some kind of broken glass effect. I wanted it to be some kind of blue color, and decided to paint the glass Corax white. While this dries, I go back to Janet and do some more of her worn leather. More on Fang Brown. Here I'm not layering per se, I'm cross-hatching the color in. Still thinned with a few drops of water, just to get it to flow better. The rougher you can get the hatches, the better. Now don't worry too much about the lightness of this color. It looks bright at the moment, but once dried it fades a bit. I use it both as a textured thing and also for the highlight. And then don't forget the hood. Here you can really see how bright it looks. Again, don't be afraid, it will dry lighter. Back to the base. Army Painter Speedpaint, Magic Blue. I just slap it on the white color. And here, I really hated the result. It didn't turn out the way I wanted. This is a thing that happens. It happens a lot more than people are willing to admit. You have this idea, this picture in your mind, and you want to create it, and once it's on the mini, it doesn't look anything like you want it to. You can either live with it or come back later with a new design. While I was contemplating on that lantern, I worked on that red scarf. A mid-tone of Mephisto red and last highlight Wild Rider red. Still keeping an eye out on those light reflected. That bad base. I dry brushed the base with Administratum Grey. Afterwards I decided to go with Balthasar Gold on the trims of the lantern. While I had the Balthasar Gold out, I also painted the crossbows. I wanted a toned down color, and Balthasar Gold is perfect for this. Speedpaint hardened leather for the quiver on the base. These speed paints are actually quite good. And while I had it out, the handles of the crossbow got a coat as well. I'm not addicted, but more speed paint. Grim Black. The quiver has these strap thingies on it, and her boot straps gets a coat as well. Now for the last leather highlight. I use Fang Brown to really intensify her leather look. Rough strokes here really get that worn leather look. Every little raised area gets cross-hatch. Well, it's not technically cross-hatching here, it's more like organized placement of paint in raised areas. There is a fine line between glazing and layering, and here I wanted to make some layering, but I ended up doing some glazing instead. I thinned it down way too much. Agrax Earth Shade. One of my favorite combos is Balthasar Gold and Agrax Earth Shade. It's just a match made in heaven. And I am a Death Guard collector and painter as well. I wanted to darken up that lantern, grime it up, but It turns out that the army painter Speedpaint gets reactivated by Citadel Agrax Earthshade. Live and learn, right? It's not all bad. The effect it gives with a white shine through isn't bad. It is time. Non-metal metal technique. I love it, I hate it, and I need to master it. The leg armor. I want this bluish hue to it, and will be using Alt 1 Grey, Administratum Grey, and Stackedon Green scale, which is actually more blue than green, and black and white. Once I have mastered it, I will make a better video. For now you just have to bear with me. I start with the midtone and map out where I think the light catches the metal. I'm glazing more than I'm layering. Thin coats and building up slowly. It's a long process, but hopefully once mastered, it'll be faster. Again, I'm doing the same as with her skin, stopping and lifting the brush where I want more power. I'm both glazing and wet blending here. It's a mess, I know. One of those things that really makes non-metal metal pop is the hard contrast between light and dark. And instead of using Abaddon Black, I'm using Corvus Black here. It has this hint of blue to it. The last thing is to give it some shine. Pure white, edge highlight and dot paint all the sharp edges and corners. This really brings it together, and in my opinion is one of the final keys to non-metal metal technique. This was one of the best non-metal metal I've ever made. And hey, if I don't gradually get better, then I'm doing something wrong, right? It's not bad. Last step is to bring out the lines. Now this is a critical moment and I can very easily destroy the mini at this point. Tongue straight in the mouth. I'm using non-oil to frame the corset and the straps on her arm, along with the border leading around her leg guards. This is to separate the different areas on the minis. Whenever you paint, you have to consider that you're looking at it from afar, and great line work helps the eye to differentiate the different colors. And I call her done. The skin wasn't the best I've done for any mini, but the non-metal metal is the best I've done at this point. That's it for this video. Give it a like, drop a comment and hit that subscribe button. Next up, I'm going to paint a mini from RNE Studios, and I need your help to decide. These are two characters from my favorite video game ever, Final Fantasy VII. And I have Cloud and I have Aerith. Which one should I paint? You decide. I'll see you in the next video. Stay nerdy.